A very warm welcome to each one of you. It is 5 p.m. on this Friday, this fortnight, and time for our webinar on compassionate caring. Compassionate caring was envisaged as a webinar education series for family caregivers who tend to be invisible, unrecognized, and often underserved. We assume that our family members will be who will be our caregivers or who will provide us care will know everything that they need to know, not just about the disease, but about everything else that long-term caregiving and sometimes challenging caregiving can come with. However, those of us who have walked this path know that long-term caring and sometimes caregiving for certain conditions can be quite challenging. Therefore, compassionate caring, because caregiving is not just a challenge for the patient, it is a significant challenge for the caregivers as well. So what can we do to make sure that caregiving is not at the cost of the caregiver? Today is our 29th session, and in this 29th session, which is designed around 7 elements of well-being, today we will be talking about the emotional support for patients and family caregivers of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, sometimes known as MND or motor neuron disease. And we will be talking about aspects of psychological well-being. I will take a few minutes to talk to you about Caregiver Saathi. Caregiver Saathi is an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the primary caregiver. The primary caregiver goes through their own challenges and sometimes unique challenges when they are navigating terminal illness or any life-limiting condition. We support them because caregivers need caregivers too. So we support them through their caregiving journeys and beyond. We wish to create an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver. So creating learning spaces so that the caregiver feels that they are in charge to the extent that is possible. Helping the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient lead full lives. None of us has the control over how long we can live. Despite medical advances, there are some things that are beyond our control. However, what is well within our control is that we can have a full life and we can enjoy life irrespective of the curved balls that are sometimes thrown at us. Caregiver Saathi is being a companion with caregivers during this journey. How do we do this? We are building technology-enabled systems to help solve the caregiver's requirements, but we prioritize human connection above all else. So we have awareness programs that are both online and offline, increasingly online these days, and very few offline, but we are hoping for a time when this will change. Regular support group or healing circles, wherein caregivers are, as a collective, come together and support each other as they learn, share, and grow. Reaching out to more people for awareness, sensitivity, and perspective, we use social media communication. And we create access to relevant information. I'd like to take a moment right now to tell you that we are running a vast volunteer program. My colleague Nabia, who is at the epicenter of this program, is also here, trying to provide reliable, trustworthy information to family caregivers as they battle COVID. And we know what an information crisis we are going through. Access to relevant information is a very significant need for family caregivers. And finally, we use technology to enable and support our initiatives. What have we done so far? In our efforts so far, we have built a tech-enabled support system, a platform, an app, a website, Much of it needs to be constantly worked on, but we've made a start. We also do training programs, like I said, online and offline. We have an app that can be used for caregivers to organize themselves to create the time and space for caring for themselves and doing other things that are important for their well being. We have a community or a collective of caregivers so that they can interact with each other, exchange notes, learn from each other, and know that somebody else understands them and that there is somebody that they can reach out to for their requirements. We believe telling our story is important, not just from inspiring others' point of view, but also from the healing of yourself point of view. Caregivers to us are gentle warriors, and we share their stories both in the video format, in which gentle warriors are invited to tell their stories and share their perspective so that we can understand, learn from them, as well as in telling their story, they can feel healed and listened to. We also have the podcast format, should you want to be anonymous and want to share your story and not really want to be seen. So if you're interested, get in touch with us and we would love to invite you for not just telling your story, but maybe even hosting these sessions. Compassionate Caring is this webinar series, which is about educating and learning the details from experts, like we have one today. Caregiver coaching is one-on-one coaching to build your skills, emotional mastery, resilience for long-term care. Family counseling, caregiving is something that impacts the whole family. And therefore, sometimes it is important for family dynamics to be understood and appreciated. And family counseling can be very useful. We also have a respite care program, and these are the things that we have done thus far. There are many ways in which you can get involved by joining the healing circles, by sharing your caregiving stories, by spreading the word, by volunteering with us, by helping raise funds, or donating to us, telling the youth, if there are any who want to participate in building this organization, internship program, and of course, giving us referrals for partners, hospitals, and other organizations. There is a framework of well-being that we use or we refer to. There are 7 elements of well-being. At the very core is physiological, spiritual, and psychological well-being. This is towards the individual, and at the periphery or in terms of interface with the world is social, financial, legal, and your life and work purpose. All of this in the realm of creative expression, your unique expression, your reason for being or leaving your mark or legacy comprises of a sense of well-being. We split it across these 7 ideas because that helps us understand ourselves better and be able to take action. We believe that stress is caused by an imbalance in well-being, and unaddressed chronic stress leads to mental health issues. Building resilience can be done through practices of mind, body, and soul. More on that later. Right now, admin announcements. We will spend the next 60 odd minutes having a discussion regarding the topic of the day and its implications for compassionate caring. There are 3 broad parts, some kind of an interview where we request you to listen and share your thoughts and questions in the chat box. We will incorporate the questions as far as possible during the discussion. There will be a question answer session in which partners or participants can ask questions directly to the guest, and you can use the raise your hand feature for that. Finally, there is feedback and suggestions, and we really look forward to your feedback and suggestions. Please keep your mics off or muted so that there is minimum background noise. You are invited to share. When you're invited to share, you can unmute yourself. If you're seated and your camera is stable, keep it on, else please turn it off. We are recording this session, and some section of the discussion may be used for sharing later. The speaker session will be live on Facebook and YouTube. We will turn off live sharing when there is question answer. In order to help us continue to make our webinars better, please provide us feedback, which will be a form that will be shared with you. And we will refer to this program for designing further, more meaningful programs. It is my immense pleasure to introduce to you this absolutely brilliant doctor who, in her quiet, gentle way, made her way into my heart when I first met her. Dr. Megha Dhamne is a consultant neurologist and a neuromuscular specialist. I met her first when we were doing the support group meetings for patients and caregivers of ALS in Mumbai. She has completed her MD in both of these from US and is currently practicing as a neuromuscular specialist in Hiranandani Hospital, Mumbai. She was awarded with a fellowship in neuromuscular medicine from Cleveland Clinic from Ohio, and comes with the experience of working in Singapore at National Neurological Institute for 3 years. She has her own nerve and to manifest this particular session, but the fact that we are here today means that we have to keep doing what we are doing. And it is our honor to have Dr. Megha here with us today. Welcome, Dr. Megha.
Thank you, Bhavana, for the very kind introduction. And yeah.
It's lovely to have you here, and thank you for extending your support and your very, very compassionate and innovative thinking at the same time. I think it's quite a skill to be compassionate and innovative at the same time.
Thank you.
So over to you, if you can give us a background and the significance of psychological and emotional well-being when it comes to ALS.
Correct. So, to all of you, I think the listeners are mostly caregivers here, or patients themselves who have been diagnosed with motor neuron disease, right? So, see, we all know ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a neurodegenerative disease. What it means is there is a degeneration of motor neurons, correct? And we have been trying to find out what is the cause. See, every time I give a diagnosis to a patient, the next question is this the correct diagnosis? What is the cause? So I think it starts the caregiver issues, the caregiver stress, and the patient stress starts right from there, especially when you are dealing with a rare disease such as ALS. Um, that's the pre-diagnosis stage, isn't it? That's where we all start. So a patient is referred to us sometimes. Yesterday, for example, I had a patient who was referred to me by a colleague, and this patient was an elderly gentleman. He had diabetes, hypertension. For 1 year, he did not step out of the house because of the COVID situation. Yeah, and he had history of falling on one side. Now he's saying he has difficulty speaking and swallowing. And his MRI brain was done, which showed old strokes. So now he's here in my clinic. I have to diagnose. He comes with his brother, who's worried because his neurologist has told him that he may have ALS. Okay, and I look at him and I give myself a pat that probably I'm not giving him a diagnosis of ALS, because he had very subtle features, subtle symptoms, but his MRI was showing chronic stroke-like lesions, which can explain all these findings. Okay, so I told him, you are lucky, you do not have this diagnosis of ALS. On the other hand, you have a patient who comes in, who was referred to me by a neurologist, his own family member, coming in severe bedbound, severely progressive disease. She's bedbound, she's a young female, 35 years old lady, and she is already having early signs of breathing difficulty, muscle wasting, fasciculations. It's a tough diagnosis because she comes in with a lot of family members. And I think there itself, when you see these patients in the clinic, that's where the stress levels begin as to, is the diagnosis correct? Do we need a second opinion? What is it that we are dealing with? I think that's where the caregiver as well as the patient stress levels increase, and it's very important for us to be on page, because it's an ongoing process, it's a continuing process where we both have to be involved together along this path, is what I feel.
You have made a choice to set up something
Hello?
called, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bhavana. I think she has.
Okay. All right. Megha, can you hear me? It's okay. We'll just wait for her to be back. And in the meanwhile, may I request those of you who've had experience with ALS, and I think she's back. Hi, Megha, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I think I missed you all. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Technology is testing us these days. Yes, please. The question that I had for you was, first, to start with, I'm very curious about your transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary clinic for ALS. What is your view about that? And why should somebody, whether a patient or a family caregiver, what do they need to know? Why does it need to be multiple disciplines, multidisciplines?
Yeah, yes. So this is something, hello?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think the internet, sorry, so bear with me. See, when I worked in the US during my fellowship, this is something that we all, as fellows, rotated in the ALS multidisciplinary clinics. Now, this concept of a multidisciplinary clinic is new in India. See, what the patient
Mm-hmm.
asks us when we have a diagnosis of a disease like ALS or other chronic neurological diseases is, doc, what is the treatment for it? Do you have a treatment for it? See, we don't have a treatment for it, but that does not mean that there is an end to it. That's what the patients and the caregivers need to understand. And we need to tell them that, see, we are here to support your ongoing needs, your continuing needs, because these could be on various aspects of the disease, not just treatment with medicines or drugs, but you also need to be treated with physiotherapy, speech therapy, swallowing therapy. Then patients need to be screened for early referral to a gastroenterologist because these patients may need a peg tube placement. Okay, and early referral to a pulmonologist because they will benefit from ventilatory support. Okay, patients also need to have a nutritionist on board, a dietitian on board. And when we're talking about emotional support, psychological well-being is also important. So it's important that, if all of these are available on a single platform, it's so much easier for the patients and the caregivers when they come for follow-up appointments, basically at the hospital, rather than running into different clinics, it's tiring, it's time consuming, and they just get lost sometimes because there is no communication between the various medical faculties taking care of the patients. So typically, when we talk about ALS multidisciplinary clinics, now where did this concept come from is because neurologists found out, they have studied that patients who have been cared for in a multidisciplinary clinic, their outcome of survival was much better than those who were not cared for in a multidisciplinary clinic. Even though when we are saying there is no treatment option for this disease, and I think that's because of increased awareness, decreased emergency visits to the hospital, like planned tracheostomies, planned interventions, planned peg tubes. So the decisions are planned, and careful actions, well planned actions are taken on these patients. I think that gives a better satisfaction to the patient and the caregivers as well, that they are, providing all aspects of care to the patient that will help him. Okay, so when I started this multidisciplinary clinic, this was a year ago, 6 months ago, basically when the pandemic started, my ALS patients and all our neurological patients were at home. They could not travel. There was no public transport, or the movement was restricted. And same thing was happening with my colleagues in the US, and they also have started the ALS multidisciplinary clinics as online. So that's what we started, as an online clinic with me, the physiotherapist, and the speech therapist, three of us. To begin with, is a small multidisciplinary clinic. In US, we also have a psychologist or a social worker and a nutritionist as other specialties here in the clinic. So we have been seeing, we started this in June, July, and we have seen about 4 or 5 patients in the first 2 to 3 months. A few of them have followed up with us for 1 or 2 times. So what we do is evaluate the patient. I see the patient first, I assess the needs, then the physiotherapist talks to the patient, and she understands what is the need. Then the speech therapist, then we all come down together and discuss what's the next plan. And this is followed up. I give the patient a WhatsApp message or a call to see how things are being planned. See, what's lacking over here is we need a coordinator for the clinic. So many things are there, we need help. So that's something that we have been working on, so that somebody can coordinate with these patients. But it's been useful, and patients need to understand that it's a continuity of care, not just a one-time clinic, and they will benefit even though you have your own physiotherapist, your own neurologist. You can do it with your own neurologist, your speech therapist. This will help in the continuity of care of your uh, loved one or your family member, basically. So far, so good.
So I think what I hear you say is that, just first, there's a shock when you hear of an incurable condition, right? And ALS is a
Yeah.
difficult, the prognosis of saying that, here's a set of things that will happen over a period of time, can be heartbreaking and can be very, very difficult. What do you think caregivers need to know as they navigate their caregiving journey? I think the first big hurdle is accepting that there is no cure,
Mm,
um, and recognizing that life can still be lived to its fullest. Uh,
yeah.
there is a sense of loss and pain around that. But then saying, okay, so what am I going to do? So would like for you to tell us with your experience that yes, there is a planned approach. Um, what are the top or the first few things that, um, you know, initial few things that a caregiver needs to do when they hear of a prognosis like ALS?
See, it's difficult. See, we cannot generalize, because what happens is you have to discuss. I discuss with a patient on an individual basis. So depending upon what is the education level of the patient and the family members, what do they want to hear in the first meeting? Okay, so for example, if I had a patient who came to me from a poor community, and he did not even understand what is ALS, or what is going to be the implication in the first meeting. What he just wanted to hear is, Madam, do you have a cure for this? That's what happens, right? And then they are like, most of the time, these patients end up switching doctors, searching for answers, going in for different therapies like Ayurveda, homeopathy. And the same thing happens with my muscle diseases or myopathies. But ALS is different because they need to know that there is a progressive disease. Your respiratory muscles will be affected. Your swallowing muscles will be affected if the disease progresses. So I think depending upon I think we need to sit down with the patient and the relatives in the first meeting and discuss with them, what is it that you know about the disease? What is it that you want to know? So that we can formulate a plan. I think most of us and most of the neurologists would agree that, we do it in a stepwise fashion. What the caregivers want to know, what the patient wants to know, rather than bombarded at the same time in the first meeting, even though some of my patients and family members have done a research, but they don't want to hear it in the first place. I mean, I'm sure nobody wants to hear a bad news. You want to hear a positive news. They are thinking maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's what people want to hear. Clinical trials is another thing they want to hear. Is my disease a genetic disease? Do you have trials? Gene therapies are all the other options that they want to hear. So there are different aspects that we discuss with them in subsequent meetings, basically.
There is a lot of conversation about stem cell therapy as well. And that, because the emphasis is so much on curing, the tendency seems to be that I should not leave any stone unturned, right? I should do everything. And if this is going to be the solution, then why not? Please tell us about that.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I had a consult for a patient who has a muscle disease, and he was telling me how somebody who he knows made him undergo a stem cell transplant for a muscle disease. And the same thing we have seen with patients with ALS, that not the neurologist, they would have discussed with the neurologist that stem cells are still under trial. There is no role as of now for stem cell, but it's an act of desperation, I feel, somewhere, that people want to do the best. You don't want to lose out on any potential modality of treatment, right? So that's where, out of desperation, somebody would go in for a stem cell transplant. That's the state right now. We do not have substantial evidence that stem cells will work for ALS. Hello?
That's quite a statement, right? And one of the causes of anxiety.
Yeah, so there are trials which are still going. Sorry, I think the internet is.
Sorry, please go ahead. You were talking about the trial.
No. Yeah, so the trials for stem cell are still going on in the US, but there is no conclusive benefit from these trials. There's no conclusive benefit of stem cells in ALS or other neurological diseases. Until then, I would not recommend any therapy because we have to remember that these are not without any side effects. Okay, so that's where I would put it
So,
as right now.
right, right. One of the things is, and one of our participants today is asking. So, for example, if I were a caregiver, I know for sure what I would want to reduce my fear or anxiety and a set of have a sense of control. And one of the ways in which I can have that sense of control is I can, can you tell me what stage are we at? So, how do I know? Like, in cancer, they speak about you're in stage 1, 2,
Correct,
etc. Is there something like that in ALS?
yeah. So ALS disease, as we all know, affects different muscles of the body, right? For some patients, the disease may start in the hands. The weakness may start in the hands. For some patients, the weakness can start in the foot muscles. And for some, the weakness can start in the bulbar muscles. What we mean by that is they have difficulty swallowing, they have difficulty speaking. Now, if your family member or a patient with ALS, the onset or the start of the symptoms is with difficulty speaking and swallowing, these patients are the ones that we find they progress um, quicker as compared to the other subset of ALS to involvement of respiratory muscle weakness, meaning breathing difficulty in layman's term. Okay, so these patients may end up into having early needs for tube feeding or early breathing difficulty or breathing issues requiring a ventilatory support. That's one group of patients. If your family member um, has progressed very rapidly, so the weakness spreads quickly, he's bedbound, he's not able to lift his hands up. So these patients who are progressing rapidly over a few months, they have a high chance of progressing to breathing difficulties or swallowing difficulties requiring a intervention in that case.
I think one of the challenges is that this feels like such a heavy, difficult, and a negative sounding uh, condition to
Yeah.
grapple with. And somebody who is the primary caregiver, forget that for that person certainly, and even somebody who's a let's say friends and family long distance caregiver, it can be so hard to feel positive and to feel energized.
Correct.
What do you suggest family caregivers? So while the caregiver is looking after the patient, our concern is the family caregiver or the primary caregiver. What are some of the things that you suggest and recommend specifically for caregivers of ALS patients that they can stay positive and they can build this endurance?
Yeah, that's very important, and I think Bhavna, you are a better person to help these people out here. And in your initial introduction, the points that you have discussed, I think we are all working on that. That is going to help the caregivers as a part of this program, Caregiver Saathi. See why caregivers need to um, remain positive is because the stress levels increase and you are being stressed out. You won't be full 100% to give care to your patients. So you need to give time to yourself. Now it's easier said than done. I also was a caregiver. I'm going to say my mom had pancreas cancer, and I was in Singapore, and it was really difficult. There's one feeling of guilt that you're not with your mom all the time. Despite being in this a medical profession, I could not stay with her for a long time. I was coming and going. Plus the stress levels go up. You need to give yourself time The first time when she was deteriorating, I would give an example. My husband made me come with him to a Sadhguru session, which was there in Singapore. And one question he asked is, there were thousands of people attending this session. Why do you think so many people are attending? It's all of us are caregivers. It's maybe not an ALS disease, but we are all caring for each other. I mean, the demands for an ALS patients are much more that we all need to understand, right? So the question that he asked was, is there one single person who does not have stress, who is happy? And nobody raised the hand. Thousands of people were attending the meeting, and it was surprising. I actually felt peace. I was at peace of I was at peace after the session was over, and I think this is the first time I have done this that day in my life. This was the first session I attended, and it gave me some peace of mind. I mean, I know that I would not be able to cure my mom's cancer in that case. I mean, as a caregiver, you know that you're not going to be able to cure your patient's ALS in this case, but you need to be at, you need to have certain um, an area where you can vent out your feelings to, maybe talk, have a social support. That is important. um, Having an emotional stability is important so that you can go back to your loved ones with renewed and a positive energy, which is going to help them do better, in the ongoing days of difficulty. It's a roller coaster ride. It's not easy. Every day there are new challenges. So we need to give ourselves a break. Take a break, and don't feel guilty if you take time off for yourself, even if it's half an hour, even if it's 1 hour, to enjoy or do or pursue your hobby during that time, because that will refreshen you and go back to your loved ones again. I think that's what is important here.
I think you know, uh, one of the things that I learned from my father's terminal illness was this, that in a very strange way, uh, knowing that there is a terminal illness can actually be turned around to making the most of life. I know it's a very strange irony of it, which is that we don't know how long any one of us has. We might not have a terminal illness, but maybe we can focus on the quality of life, and maybe we can focus on the time at hand.
Correct.
Rather than what might happen. And that can be hard, that can be difficult. And because it is hard and difficult and complex, perhaps people need support groups, and people need places that you can vent your or express your feelings and feel understood. So thank you. Sometimes in ALS, there are limitations of speech and expression over a period of time, and caregivers probably need to learn new skills. So, what would you say about that in terms of constantly you have to learn new ways of coping? What to be prepared for?
Yeah, so I think so see, when we talk to our patients as well. Now I had a medical student whose father, so she's just finished her MBBS, and she brings her dad in a wheelchair, with because he has ALS. So his disease started with weakness in the legs, and now I hadn't seen her father for a year, but I was in touch with the family through this online multidisciplinary clinic. But this time, when I saw him, he wasn't able to communicate well, and that could be something that needs to be discussed with the caregivers. Now, this patient's daughter herself is a medical student, and it was a little easy for me for her to explain that, we can start with measures such as voice banking. It's a very easy way to start. You can give them different options now. Internet is easily available to all, unlike the past years where technology was not easily available. There are so many advances here, so it's easier to learn. There are YouTube videos, there are social groups that we all, I link the patients to. All of you here who are ALS caregivers are doing a wonderful job helping out each other and helping out other patients as well. So that I think that's making the job easier, and supporting each other also gives a positive feeling. I can see here Harinder Rawat is here. He is here, and I've known him for the last 1 to 2 years through this support group meetings. So such people we need to work with us and our patients' families as well, who have been helping out, uh, to try to make others' journey easier through their experiences. And I really thank all of you who are helping us out for these patients. Yeah, I think that's the way to go. That help out each other and learn from each other's experiences. I think patients teach us much more than we telling them what's to be done. Sometimes they bring us different ideas.
Yeah.
For example, Harinder himself had, remember one day in the ICU, his wife was admitted and she had pneumonia. She was bedbound, tracheostomy for 1 year. And the only way she was communicating, he said, my wife could not use the Tobii eye tracker. And what he did was very innovative. It was the Indian style. He took um, you know, a plate, a steel plate, and something he attached to her finger, so she could just click on the plate, and that way she could communicate. It was a unique method of communicating through whatever we have. Is what the caregivers learn, and they have these unique ideas.
Dr. Megha,
yes.
It is Commander Rawat. I had that time.
You want to talk? You want to tell us your experience, Harinder?
Ask again. No, what Dr. Megha?
Yeah, why don't you speak?
What Dr. Megha was saying about that,
Mr. Harinder?
the finger was actually a coin, and you should tap it on the steel plate below. That kind of alerted that you want something. That was one of the things.
What he's saying is, you need to be closer to your mic, Commander Rawat. He's saying is that he tied a coin.
He tied a coin. Correct.
Coin.
Something he tied. Correct. So you could make a voice.
What Megha talked about, this is what I had done for my mind. And I also, put a laser, small pen on a glass spectacle. On a spectacle. And I put a chart which had ABCD on it. So she could, read out words from there. Like Toby. She could use the Toby for whatever reason. So what we did, we put a small pencil laser pointer on a spectacle, and then you look at a chart where we have written ABCD. It was quite big and bold. It would read words out. Dr. Megha, I want to ask you one question if I'm not interrupting.
Your voice is not very clear.
A moment. I think I'll have to switch off my Bluetooth. Sorry.
Would you like to use?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I think why don't you tell our viewers what
okay, what I'll do, I'll write it on the chat.
Now you're much better audible. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commander Rawat. You can say, I can hear you better now. I think he spoke about some everyday innovations, and he spoke about using sound. So coin, using the coin to tap, as well as I think he's speaking about the laser pointer, which was pointed to the glass.
What is your view about living will?
Yes, that concept is not there here. See, I think it's very important to talk to the patients and or the relatives. See, when they know in their early stage, when they are able to speak and make choices for themselves as well as their family members, I think it's very important that we are open minded when the doctor brings up this topic or a psychologist brings up this topic, so that uh, patients can think about it and uh, they are open to work on a living will. I think all of us should be doing that and working on it, isn't it? We are not just used to doing that as how people do in the US, but I think it will ease out the burden on the caregiver as well.
Yeah.
uh, I think
One,
that's very
one,
important. Yeah.
one of my colleague died 2-3 days back in Delhi.
Oh no, I'm so
He
sorry.
did not use ventilator. He did not go for tracheostomy. He did not go for PEG. He didn't use Ryle tube. And he told all his family members and his caretaker, there was a lady doctor who was his caretaker, that I will die whenever my time comes. I don't want to create extra burden, knowing the fact that anyway I'm going to die. So I thought it was a very bold decision by him. But yes,
Correct,
it's a very
absolutely.
big decision which not only the patient but even the caregivers have to really think about, because you
Yes.
would like your loved one to live even 2 days or even 1 hour more. But yeah, it's a difficult question,
Hmm.
I know, but yes, it needs consideration now, because you're only
Correct.
extending the
Yeah.
misery by another few months or a year or two.
Yes.
That's a lovely
And
point.
sometimes
Sorry.
it's a very good point. And sometimes what happens, as you correctly pointed out, is we know the patient knows, the caregiver knows that your loved one is not going to be able to speak, but they don't even they think about these issues about what's going to be the decision, but they think that the patient will not be able to make wise decisions, is what happens sometimes. Or I want to make decisions for my loved one because I don't want to lose my loved one. But have you ever thought what your loved one wants? Because I think from a patient point of view, he would be happy to make choices and decisions for himself, whether he is an educated person or an uneducated person. Each one of us want to make a decision for ourselves, want to make a decision what we want from our life. And I think that's more important, and that will make them um, happier as well, that okay, I have chosen this, as Mr. Rawat was saying. And that's an important decision that all of us need to discuss in an early stage when your patients can talk. I have been discussing this with my patients. If I get a chance at some point, what do you want? Do you want a tracheostomy? Do you want a PEG tube? It's an ongoing discussion that we need to discuss with the patients. It's a very important point. Thank you, Mr. Rawat, for bringing this point.
I also feel that as a doctor who treats MND patients, you should approach this point to be not tell them to do it, but tell them that you may consider this, because honestly, I did not know about it, but probably I would have made this decision. I would have loved to have it as long as possible with coming in 10 surgeries. But I think it would be worthwhile mentioning, because nobody mentioned it to me till I heard it about a friend of mine who passed away in Delhi. And then caretaker, doctor, lady doctor, told me that he had written a living will. And I asked him, was he on ventilator? He said, no. Was he on bed? He lived 7.5 years. And we couldn't talk, of course, but he was using Toby to communicate very well. So that was, I guess, was a very good care that was taken. If I ever asked the second Bhavana, we can have her on the call and listen to her experiences, how she starts this voice. So yeah, thank you for this.
So yes, we've had
I
one
think his
session.
voice is cutting off, Bhavna. Can you hear what Mr. Rawat was saying?
Yes, I think he's speaking about I wish I knew about the living will, and he spoke about I think we need to create more awareness And he's absolutely
Yes.
right, Commander Rawat. We've had
Correct,
a couple of
absolutely.
sessions.
Yeah.
We've had a discussion with Dr. Roop Kurshani, who you know, who is quite an advocate of the living will and advance directives. And we would encourage all of you to
Yeah.
see those recordings and maybe read about them on our website as well. So a living will is only as effective or as meaningful. So the person who is the patient may exercise their choice, but as one of our participants today is saying, that sometimes caregivers are emotionally bound with the person, and the idea of dying or the idea of, letting go that person can be very painful. And I can relate with that personally. So it's not an easy conversation.
Correct.
It is a very difficult conversation, but it helps, and it's a matter of giving dignity to that person, honoring their wish, and yes, sometimes it can come with a little pain, uh, but pain se kaun bachaye.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing those points, Dr. Megha, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, which is sometimes you would have caregivers coming up to you with questions that might be beyond your medical realm. So what is your advice to family caregivers about, all other questions, all other aspects of their lives that are impacted because of the illness? What can they do?
Give me an example.
So let's say,
in what?
Yeah. Sometimes,
Hello?
What about, emotional outbursts in the patient and mood swings in the patient?
Okay.
What can we do?
Okay. Yeah. So, so this is something called as emotional liability. Okay. Is that what you want me to talk about?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is something called as emotional liability, and it is a part of the disease that we deal with. So not all patients with ALS will go through emotional liability. What I mean by emotional liability is, the patients would be just smiling inappropriately, or crying inappropriately, or out of proportion to what their typical behavior is. Okay. And the caregiver, if they are not aware about these symptoms as a part of ALS, they would be confused as to why my loved one is just smiling when he is facing a disease where he is going to die. So they just get confused. So they need to be told that these are symptoms of ALS. There are treatments available for this, and there is a medicine called New Dexter which can be given. There are antidepressants that can be used for stabilizing the emotions for these patients, and we need to be very empathetic with these patients, and realize that it is just a part of the disease. They are not expressing their emotions. They are not themselves over here. It's because it's the higher function which is out of control. Okay. Like how we have a central and a local government, our brain also is a central government there, which is balancing or controlling the emotions, as how the functions of the hands, the legs. So these are the motor functions, they are controlled by the brain. This emotional function is also controlled by the brain. That function is gone, that control is gone. And that's why we see these emotional changes that we see in these patients. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to stop the live stream now.
Okay.
And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for your participation, your time, your wisdom. And we will open the forum for any other questions that people may want to directly ask.